Theme 11. Revolts and the RAJ. The Revolt of 1857 and its representations. Late in the afternoon of 10th May 1857, the sepoys in the cantonment of Meerut broke out in mutiny. It began in the lines of the native infantry, spread very swiftly to the cavalry and then to the city. The ordinary people of the town and surrounding villages joined the sepoy. The sepoy captured the bale of arms, where the arms and ammunition were kept, and proceeded to attack white people, and to ransack and burn their bungalows and property, government buildings. The record office, jail, court, post office, treasury, etc. were destroyed and plundered. The telegraph line to Delhi was cut. A darkness descended. A group of sepoy rode off towards Delhi. The sepoy arrived at the gates of the Red Fort early in the morning on 11th May. It was the month of Ramzan, the Muslim holy month of prayer and fasting. The old Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah had just finished his prayers and meal before the sun rose and the fast began. He heard the commotion at the gates. The sepoy who had gathered under his window told him, "We have come from Meerut after killing all the Englishmen there, because they asked us to bite bullets that were coated with the fat of cows and pigs with our teeth. This has corrupted the faith of Hindus and Muslims alike." Another group of sepoy also entered Delhi, and the ordinary people of the city joined them. Europeans were killed in large number. The rich of Delhi were attacked and looted. It was clear that Delhi had gone out of British control. Some sepoy rode into the Red Fort. Without observing the elaborate court etiquette expected of them, they demanded that the emperor give them his blessing. Surrounded by the sepoys, Bahadur Shah had no other option but to comply. The revolt thus acquired a kind of legitimacy because it could now be carried on in the name of the Mughal emperor. Portrait of Bahadur Shah. Through 12 and 13 May, North India remained quiet. Once word spread that Delhi had fallen to the rebels and Bahadur Shah had blessed the rebellion. Events moved swiftly, cantonment after cantonment in the Gangetic Valley and some to the west of Delhi rose in mutiny. One pattern of the rebellion. If one were to place the dates of these mutinies in chronological orders, it would appear that as the news of the mutiny in one town travelled to the next, the sepoys there took up arms. The sequence of events in every cantonment followed a similar pattern. Bale of arms is a storeroom in which weapons are kept. How the mutinies began. Ferengi means a term Persian origin, possibly derived from Frank, from which France gets its name, is used in Urdu and Hindi, often in a derogatory sense, to designate foreigners. The sepoy begins their action with a signal. In many places, it was the firing of the evening gun or the sounding of the bugle. They first seized the bale of arms and plundered the treasury. They then attacked government buildings, the jail, treasury, telegraph office, record room, bungalows, burning all records. Everything and everybody connected with the white man became a target. The proclamation in Hindi, Urdu, and Persian were put up in the cities, calling upon the population, both Hindus and Muslims, to unite, rise, and exterminate the Feringis. Ordinary people joined the sepoys in attacking the British in Lucknow. When ordinary people began joining the revolt, the targets of attack widened in major towns like Lucknow, Kanpur, and Bareilly. Moneylenders and the rich also became the objects of rebel wrath. Peasants not only saw them as oppressors but also as allies of the British. In most places their houses were looted and destroyed. The mutiny in the sepoy ranks quickly became a rebellion. There was a general defiance of all kind of authority and hierarchy. In the months of May and June, the British had no answer to the action of the rebels. Individual Britons tried to save their own lives and the lives of their families. British rule, as one British official noted, collapsed like a house made of cards. Ordinary life in extraordinary times. What happened in the cities during the month of the revolt? How did people live through those months of tumult? How was normal life affected? Reports from different cities tell us about the breakdown in routine activities. Read these reports from the Delhi Urdu Akbar, 14 June 1857. The same thing is true for vegetables and sak means spinach. People have been found to complain that even kaddu means pumpkin and bengan means brinjal cannot be found in the bazaars. Potatoes or arbi means yam when available are of stale and rotten variety. Stored from before by foresighted kundras means vegetable growers. From the garden inside the city some produce does reach a few places, but the poor and the middle class can only lick their lips and watch them as they are marked for the select. There is something else that needs attention which is causing a lot of damage to the people, which is that the water carriers have stopped filling water. Poor surfers gently are seen carrying water in pails on their shoulders, and only then the necessary household tasks such as cooking, etc. can take place. The halal courts mean righteous have become haram courts mean corrupt. Many mohallas have not been able to earn for several days, and if this situation continues, then decay, death, and disease will combine together to spoil the city air, and an epidemic will spread all over the city and even to areas adjacent and around. Read the two reports and the description of what was happening in Delhi provided in the chapter. Remember that newspaper reports often express the prejudices of the reporter. How did Delhi Urdu Akbar view the actions of the people? Comment this. Lines of communications. The reason for the similarity in the pattern of the revolt in different places lay partly in its planning and coordinations. It is clear that there was communications between the super lines of various cantonments after the 7th Awadh irregularly cavalry had refused to accept the new Kurtis in early May. They wrote to the 48th Native Infantry that they had acted for the faith and outed for 48th order. Sepoy or their emissaries moved from one station to another. People were thus planning and talking about the rebellion. Sistine and the Tahsildar. In the context of the communication of the message of revolt and mutiny, the experience of Francis Sistine, a native Christian police inspector in Sitapur, is telling he had gone to Saharanpur to pay his respect to the magistrate. Sistine was dressed in Indian clothes and sitting cross-legged. A Muslim Tahsildar from Bijnor entered the room. Upon learning then Sistine was from Awadh, he inquired, "What news from Awadh? How does the work progress, brother?" Playing safe, Sestan replied, "If we have work in Awadh, your highness will know it." The Tahsildar said, "Depend upon it. We will succeed it this time. The direction of the business is in able hands." The Tahsildar was later identified as the principal rebel leader of Bijnor. What was the conversation suggest about the ways in which plans were communicated and discussed by the rebels? Why did the Tahsildar regard Sistan as a potential rebel? Comment this. Mutiny means a collective disobedience of rules and regulations within the armed force. Revolt means a rebellion of people against established authority and power. The terms revolt and rebellion can be used synonymously. In the context of revolt of 1857, the term revolt refers primarily to the uprising of the civilian population, peasant jamindars, rajas, jagirdars, while the mutiny was of the sipars. The pattern of the mutinies and the pieces of evidence that suggest some sort of planning and coordination raise certain crucial questions. How were the plans made? Who were the planners? It is difficult on the basis of the available documents to provide direct answer to such questions. But one incident provides clues as to how the mutinies came to be so organized. Captain Harsley of the Awadh military police had been given protection by his Indian subordinate during the mutiny. The 41st Native Infantry, which was stationed in the same place, insisted that since they had killed all their white officers, the military police should also kill Yarse or deliver him as prisoner to the 41st. The military police refused to do either, and it was decided that the matter would be settled by a panchayat composed of native officers drawn from each regiment. Charles Bull, who wrote one of the earliest histories of the uprising, noted that panchayats were a nightly occurrence in the Kanpur Sepa lines. What this suggests is that some of the decisions were taken collectively, given the fact that the Sepa lived in lines and shared a common lifestyle and that many of them came from the same caste. It is not difficult to imagine them sitting together to decide their own future. The Sipais were the makers of their own rebellion. Rani Lakshmi Bai, a popular image. Leaders and followers. To fight the British, leadership and organizations were required. For this, the rebels sometimes turned to those who had been leaders before the British conquest. One of the first acts of the Sipais of Meerut, as we saw, was the rush of Delhi and appeal to the old Mughal Empire to accept the leadership of the revolt. The acceptance of leadership took its time in coming. Bahadur Shah's first reaction was one of horror and rejection. It was only when some sepoy had moved into the Mughal court within the Red Fort, in defiance of normal court etiquette, that the old emperor, realizing he had very few options, agreed to be the nominal leader of the rebellion. Elsewhere, similar scenes were enacted, though on a minor scale. In Kanpur, the Sipais and the peoples of the town gave Nana Sahib and successor to Peshwa Bajirao 2. No choice save to join the revolt as their leader. In Jhansi, the Rani was forced by the popular pressure around her to assume the leadership of the uprising. So was Kunwar Singh, a local jamindar in Arra in Bihar. In Awadh, where the displacement of the popular Nawab Wajid Ali Shah and the annexation of the state were still very fresh in the memory of the people. The populace in Lucknow celebrated the fall of British rule by hailing British Qadir, the young son of Nawab, as their leader. Not everywhere were the leaders people of the court, Ranis, Rajas, Nababs, and Talukdars. Often the message of rebellion was carried by ordinary men and women, and in places by religious men too. From Meerut, there were reports that a fakir had appeared riding on an elephant and that the Sipais were visiting him frequently. In Lucknow, after the annexation of Awadh, there were many religious leaders and self-styled prophets who preached the destruction of British rule. Elsewhere, local leaders emerged urging peasant jamidars and tribals to revolt. Shah Mal mobilized the villagers of Pargana Barut in Uttar Pradesh. Gonu, a tribal cultivator of Shingbhum in Chotanagpur, became a rebel leader of the Kol tribals of the region. Nana Sahib, at the end of 1858, when the rebellion collapsed, Nana Sahib escaped to Nepal. The story of his escape added to the legend of Nana Sahib's courage and valor. Two rebels of 1857, Shah Mal. Shah Mal lived in a large village in Pargana, Bharuch in Uttar Pradesh. He belonged to a clan of Jat cultivators whose kinship ties extended over Chorosi, Des 84 villages. The land in the regions were irrigated and fertile with rich dark loam soil. Many of the villagers were prosperous and saw the British land revenue system as oppressive. The revenue demand was high and its collection inflexible. Consequently, cultivators were losing land to outsiders, to traders and moneylenders who were coming into the area. Shamal mobilized the headmen and cultivators of Chorosides, moving at night from village to village, urging people to rebel against the British as in many other places. The revolt against the British turned into a general rebellion against all signs of oppression and injustice. Cultivators left their fields and plundered the houses of moneylenders and traders. Displaced proprietors took possession of the lands they had lost. Shamal's men attacked government buildings, destroyed the bridge over the river, and dug up metal road, partly to prevent government forces from coming into the area, and partly because bridges and roads were seen as symbol of British rule. They sent supplies to the Sipais who had mutinied in Delhi and stopped all official communication between British headquarters and Meerut locally, acknowledged as the Raja. Shaumal took over the bungalow of an English officer, turned it into a hall of justice, settling disputes and dispensing judgment. He also set up the amazingly effective network of intelligence. For a period, the people of the area felt that Firingi Raj was over and their Raj had come. Shaumal was killed in battle in July 1857. Maulavi Ahmadullah Shah. Maulavi Ahmadullah Shah was one of the many Maulavis who played an important part in revolt of 1857. Educated in Hyderabad, he became a preacher when young. In 1857, was seen moving from village to village, preaching jihad, religious war, against the British and urging people to rebel. He moved in a palanquin with drumbeaters in front and followers as the rear. He was therefore popularly called Danka Shah. The Maulavi was the drum means Danka. British officials panicked as thousands began following the Maulavi and many Muslims began seeing him as an inspired prophet. When he reached Lucknow in 1856, he was stopped by the police from preaching in the city. Subsequently, in 1857, he was jailed in Faidabad. When released, he was elected by the mutinous 22nd Native Infantry as their leaders. He fought in the famous Battle of Chennath, in which the British forces under Henry Lawrence were defeated. came to be known for his courage and power. Many people, in fact, believed that he was invincible, had magical power, and could not be killed by the British. It was this belief that partly formed the basis of his authority. Rumors and prophecies. Rumors and prophecies played a part in moving people to action. As we saw, the Sipais who had arrived in Delhi from Meerut had told Bahadur Shah about bullets coated with the fat of cows and pigs, and that biting those bullets would grab their caste and religion. They were referring to the Kurds of the Enfield Rifles, which had just been given to them. The British tried to explain to the sepoy that this was not the case, but the rumor that the new Kurds were greased with the fat of cows and pigs spread like wildfire across the sepoy lines of North India. Henry Hardinge by Francis Grant, 1849. A Governor General Hardinge attempted to modernize the equipment of the army. The Enfield rifles that were introduced initially used the greased cartridge the sepoy rebelled against. This is one rumor whose origin can be traced. Captain Wright, commandant of the Rifle Instruction Depot, reported that in the third week of January 1857, a locust Khalsi, who worked in the magazine in Dum had asked a Brahmin sepoy for a drink of water from his lota. The sepoy had refused, saying that the lower castes touch would defile the lota. The Khalsi has reportedly retorted, "You will soon lose your caste, as very long you will have to bite cartridge covered with the fat of cows and pigs." We do not know the veracity of the report, but once this rumor started, no amount of assurance from British officers could stop its circulations, and fear spread among the sepoys. This was not the only rumors that were circulating in North India at the beginning of 1857. There was the rumor that the British government had hatched a gigantic conspiracy to destroy the caste and religion of Hindu and Muslims. To this end, the rumor said the British had mixed the bone dust of cows and pigs into the flour that was sold in the market. In towns and cantonments, sepoy and the common people refused to touch the atta. There was fear and suspicions that the British wanted to convert Indians to Christianity. Panic spread fast. British officers tried to allay their fears, but in vain. These fears stirred men to action. The response to the call for action was reinforced by the prophecy that British rule would come to an end on the centenary of the Battle of Plassey on 33 June 1857. Rumors were not the only thing circulating at the time. Reports came from various parts of North India that chapatis were being distributed from village to village. A person would come at night and give a chapati to the watchman of the village and ask him to make 5 more and distribute to the next village, and so on. The meaning and purpose of the distribution of the chapatis was not clear and is not clear even today, but there is no doubt that people read it as an omen of an upheaval. Why did people believe in the rumors? We cannot understand the power of rumors and prophecies in history by checking whether they are factually correct or not. We need to see what they reflect about the minds of people who believe them, their fears and apprehensions, their faith and convictions. Rumors circulate only when they resonate with the deeper fears and suspicions of people. The rumors in 1857 begin to make sense when seen in the context of the policies the British pursued from the late 1820s. As you know, from that time, under the leadership of Governor General Lord William Bentinck, the British adopted policies aimed at reforming Indian society by introducing Western education, Western ideas, and Western institutions. With the cooperation of section of Indian society, they set up English medium schools, colleges and universities which taught Western sciences and the liberal arts. The British established laws to abolish customs like Shoti 1829 and to permit the remarriage of Hindu widows. On a variety of pleas like misgovernment and the refusal to organize adoption, the British annexed not only Awadh, but many other kingdoms and principalities like Jhansi and Satara. Once these territories were annexed, the British introduced their own system of administration, their own laws, and their own methods of land settlement and land revenue collection. The cumulative impact of all this on the people of North India was profound. It seemed to the people that all that they cherished and held sacred, from kings and socio-religious customs to pattern of landholding and revenue payment, was being destroyed and replaced by a system that was moral, impersonal, alien and oppressive. This perception was aggravated by the activities of Christian missionaries. In such a situation of uncertainty, rumors spread with remarkable swiftness. To explore the basis of the revolt of 1857 in some detail, let us look at Awadh. One of the major centers where the Dharma of 1857 unfolded. Discuss, read the section once more and explain the similarities and differences you notice in the ways in which leaders emerged during the revolt. For any two leaders, discuss why ordinary people were drawn to them. Comment this. To Awadh in revolt. A cherry that will drop into our mouth one day. In 1851, Governor General Lord Dalhousie described the kingdom of Awadh as a cherry that will drop into our mouth one day. 5 years later, in 1856, the kingdom was formally annexed to the British Empire. Resident was the designation of a representative of the Governor General who lived in a state which was not under direct British rule. The conquest happened in stages. The subsidiary alliance had been imposed on Awadh in 1801. By the terms of the alliance, the Nawab had to disband his military forces, allow the British to position their troops within the kingdom, and act in accordance with the advice of the British resident who was now to be attached to the court. Deprived of his armed forces, the Nawab became increasingly dependent on the British to maintain law and order within the kingdom. He could no longer assert control over the rebellious chiefs and taluktars. In the meantime, the British became increasingly interested in acquiring the territory of Awadh. They felt that the soil there was good for producing indigo and cotton, and the region was ideally located to be developed into the principal market of Upper India. By the clearly 1850s, moreover, all the major areas of India had been conquered. The Maratha lands, the Doab, the Carnatic, the Punjab and Bengal. The takeover of Awadh in 1856 was expected to complete a process of territorial annexations that had begun with the conquest of Bengal almost a century earlier. Subsidiary Alliance. Subsidiary Alliance was a system devised by Lord Wellesley in 1798. all those who entered into such an alliance with the British had to accept certain terms and conditions. A. The British would be responsible for protecting their ally from external and internal threat to their power. B. In the territory of the ally, a British armed contingent would be stationed. C. The ally would have to provide the resources for maintaining this contingent. D. The ally could enter into agreement with other rulers or engage in warfare only with the permission of the British. The life was gone out of the body. Lord Dalhousie annexation created disaffection in all the areas and principalities that were annexed but nowhere more so than in the kingdom of Awadh in the heart of North India. Here Nawab Wajid Ali Shah was dethroned and exiled to Calcutta on the plea that the region was being misgoverned. The British government also wrongly assumed that Wajid Ali Shah was an unpopular ruler. On the contrary, he was widely loved, and when he left his beloved Lucknow, there were many who followed him all the way to Kanpur singing songs of lament. The widespread sense of grief and loss at the Nawab's exile, and recorded by many contemporary observers, one of them wrote, "The life was gone out of the body, and the body of this town had been left lifeless. There was no street or market and house which did not wail out the cry of agony and separation of Jan-e-Alam. On folk songs bemoaned that the honorable Englishman came and took the country. Angrez Bahadur aaye, mulk le lena." Territory under British control. Mapwan territories under British control in 1857. Kashmir, Peshawar, Afghanistan, Punjab, Panipat, Delhi, Rajputana, Sindh, Scindia, Holkar, Gujarat, Surat, Lucknow, Awadh, Benares, Patna, Bihar, Rewa, Allahabad, Bengal, Calcutta, Dhaka, Chittagong, Odisha, Berar, Aurangabad, Bombay, Pune, Nizam, Hyderabad, Goa, Masulipatam, Mysore, Coorg, Mysore, Arcot, Madras, Fort St. David, Cochin, Madurai, Travancore, this emotional upheaval was aggravated by immediate material losses. The removal of the Nawab led to the dissolution of the court and its culture. Thus, a whole range of people, musicians, dancers, poets, artisans, cooks, retainers, administrative officials, and so on, lost their livelihoods. The Nawab has left. Another song mourned the plight of the ruler who had to leave his motherland. Noble and peasant all wept together, and all the world wept and wailed. Alas, the chief was bidden adieu to his country and gone abroad. Read the entire section and discuss why people mourn the departure of Wajid Ali Shah. Comment this. Firangi Raj and the end of the world. A chain of grievance in Awadh linked prince, talukdar, peasant and sepoy in different ways. They came to identify Firangi Raj. With the end of their world, the breakdown of things they valued, respected, and held dear, a whole complex of emotions and issues traditions and loyalties worked themselves out in revolt of 1857. In Awadh, more than anywhere else, the revolt became an expression of popular resistance to an alien order. The annexation displaced not just the Nawab, it was disposed the Talukdar of the region. The countryside of Awadh was dotted with the estates and forts of Talukdars who for many generations had controlled land and power in the countryside. Before the coming of the British, Talukdars maintained armed retainers, built forts and enjoyed a degree of autonomy, as long as they accepted the suzerainty of the Nawab and paid the revenue of their taluks. Some of the bigger talukdars had as many as 12,000 foot soldiers, and even the smaller ones had about 200. The British were unwilling to tolerate the power of the talukdars. Immediately after the annexation, the talukdars were disarmed and their forts destroyed. A Jamindar from Awadh, 1880. The British land revenue policy further undermined the position and authority of the talukdars after annexation. The first special revenue settlement, known as the Somali Settlement in 1856, was based on the assumption that the talukdars were interlopers with no permanent stakes in land. They had established their hold over land through force and fraud. The Somali settlement proceeded to remove the talukdars wherever possible. Figures showed that in pre-British times, talukdar had held 67% of the total number of villages in Awadh. By the Somali settlement, this number had come down to 38%. The talukdars of southern Awadh were the hardest hit and some lost more than half of the total number of villages they had previously held. British land revenue officers believed that by removing talukdars they would be able to settle the land with the actual owner of the soil and thus reduce the level of exploitations of peasants while increasing revenue returns for the state. But this did not happen in practice. Revenue flows for the state increased, but the burden of demand on the peasant did not decline. Officials soon found that large areas of Awadh were actually heavily overused. The increase of revenue demand in some places was from 30 to 70%. Thus, neither talukdars nor peasants had any reasons to be happy with the annexations. The dispossession of talukdars meant the breakdown of an entire social order. The ties of loyalty and patronage that had bound the peasant to the talukdar were disrupted in pre-British times. The talukdar were oppressed, but many of them also appeared to be generous father figures. They exacted a variety of dues from the peasant, but were often considered in times of need. No wonder the peasant was directly exposed to overassessment of revenue and inflexible methods of collection. There was no longer any guarantee that in times of hardship or crop failure the revenue demand of the state would be reduced or collection postponed, or that in times of festives the peasant would get the loan and support that the talukdar had earlier provided. What talukdar thoughts? The attitude of talukdar was best expressed by Hanwant Singh, the Raja of Kalakankar near Rai Bareli. During the mutiny, Hanwant Singh had given shelter to a British officer and conveyed him to safety. While taking leave of the officer, Hanwant Singh told him, "Sahib, your countrymen came into this country and drove out our king. You sent your officers round the district to examine the titles to the estate. At one blow you took from me lands which from time immemorial had been in my family. I I submitted. Suddenly misfortune fell upon you. The people of the land rose against you. You came to me whom you had despoiled. I have saved you, but now I march at the head of my retainers to Lucknow to try and drive you from the country. What does the excerpt tell you about the attitude of the Talukdars? Who did Hanwant Singh mean the people of the land? What reason does Hanwant Singh give for the anger of the people? Comment this. In areas like Awadh, where resistance during 1857 was intense and long-lasting, the fighting was carried out by Talukdars and their peasants. Many of these Talukdars were loyal to the Nawab of Awadh, and they joined Begum Hazrat Mahal, the wife of the Nawab, in Lucknow to fight the British. Some even remained with her in defeat. The grievances of the present were carried over into the Sepoy lines since a vast majority of the Sepoys are recruited from the village of Abad. For decades, the Sepoy had complained of low levels of pay and the difficulty of getting leave. By the 1850s. There were other reasons for their discontent. The relationship of the Sepoy with their superior white officer underwent a significant change in the years preceding the Rising of 1857. In the 1820s, white officers made it a point to maintain friendly relations with the Sepoys. They would take part in their leisure activities, they wrestled with them, fenced with them, and went out hawking with them. Many of them were fluent in Hindustani and were familiar with the customs and culture of the country. These officers were disciplinarian and further fatigue rolled into one. In the 1840s, this began to change. The officers developed a sense of superiority and started treating the sepoy as their racial inferiors, riding uh, roughshod over their sensibilities. Abuse and physical violence became common, and thus the distance between sepoys and officers grew. Trust was replaced by suspicions. The episodes of the Grease Curtis was a classic example of this. Bengal sepoys in European styles uniform. It is also important to remember that close links existed between the sepoys and the rural world of North India. The large majority of the sepoys of the Bengal army were recruited from the village of Awadh and eastern Uttar Pradesh. Many of them were Brahmins or from the upper caste. Awadh was in fact called the nursery of the Bengal army. The changes that the families of the sepoys saw around them and the threats they perceived were quickly transmitted to the sepoy lines. In turn, the fears of the sepoy about the new cartridge, their grievance about leave, their grievances about the increasing misbehavior and racial abuse on the part of their white officers were communicated back to the villages. The link between the sepoys and the rural world had important implications in the course of the uprising. When the sepoys defied their superior officers and took up arms, they were joined very swiftly by their brethren in the village. Everywhere peasants poured into the towns and joined the soldiers and the ordinary people of the towns in collective acts of rebellion. Discuss. Find out whether people in your state participated in the revolt in 1857. If they did, find out why they did so. If they did not, try and explain this. Comment this. 3. What the rebels wanted. As victors, the British recorded their own trials and tribunals actions as well as their heroisms. They dismissed the rebels as a bunch of ungrateful and barbaric people. The repressions of the rebels also meant silencing of their voice. Few rebels had the opportunity of recording their versions of events. Moreover, most of them were sepoy or ordinary people who were not lettered. Thus, other than a few proclamations and istihars means notification issued by rebels leaders to propagate their ideas and persuade people to join the revolt. We do not have much that throws light on the perspective of the rebels. Attempts to reconstruct what happened in 1857 are thus heavily and inevitably dependent on what the British wrote. While these sources reveal the minds of officials, they tell us very little about what the rebels wanted. The vision of unity. The rebel proclamations in 1857 repeatedly appealed to all sections of the population, irrespective of their caste and creed. Many of the proclamations were issued by Muslim princes or in their names, but even this took care to address the sentiments of Hindus. The rebellion was seen as a war in which both Hindus and Muslims had equally to lose or gain. The Istihars hark back to the pre-British Hindu-Muslim past and glorified the coexistence of different communities under the Mughal Empire. The proclamations that were issued under the name of Bahadur Shah appealed to the people to join the fight under the standard of both Muhammad and Mahabir. It was remarkable that during the uprising religious divisions between Hindus and Muslims were hardly noticeable despite British attempts to create such divisions. In Vreli, in western Uttar Pradesh in December 1857, the British spent 50,000 rupees to incite the Hindu population against the Muslim. The attempt failed. The Azamgarh Proclamations, 25th August 1857. This is one of the main sources of our knowledge about what the rebels wanted. It is well known to all that in this age the people of Hindustan, both Hindus and Mohammedans, are being ruined under the tyranny and the oppressions of the infidel and treacherous English. It is therefore the burden duty of all the wealthy people of India, especially those who have any sort of connection with the Mohammedan royal families and are considered the pastors and masters of their people, to stake their lives and property for the well-being of the public. Several of the Hindu and Muslim chiefs who have long since quitted their homes for the preservation of their regions and have been trying their best to root out the English in India, have presented themselves to me and taken part in the regaining Indian crusade, and it is more than probable that I shall very shortly receive succors from the West. Therefore, for the information of the public, the present Istihar, consisting of several sections, is put in circulation, and it is the imperative duty of all to take into their careful consideration and abide by it. Parties anxious to participate in the common cause but having no means to provide for themselves shall receive their daily subsistence from me, and be it known to all that the ancient works both of the Hindus and Mohammedans, the writings of miracles workers and the calculations of the astrologers Pandits, all agree in asserting that the English will no longer have any footing in India or elsewhere. Therefore, it is incumbent on all to give up the hope of the continuations of British away, side with me, and deserve the consideration of the Badshahi or imperial government by their individual exertion in continued promoting the common good and thus attain their respective ends, otherwise if this golden opportunity slips away. They will have to repent for their folly. Section 1 regarding Jamindars, it is evident that the British government in making Jamindari settlements have imposed exorbitant jumas, means revenue demand, and have disgraced and ruined several Jamindars by putting up their estate for public auctions for arrears of rent. It is so much in the institution of a suit by a common right, a maid servant, or slaves. The respectable Jamindars are summoned into court, arrested, put in gaol, and disgraced. In litigations regarding Jamindaris, the immense values of stamps and other unnecessary expenses of the civil court are all calculated to improve various the litigants. Besides this, the coffers of the Jamindars are annually taxed with the subscription of schools, hospitals, roads, etc. Such extortions will have no manners of existence in the Badshahi government, but on the contrary, the Jumas will be light. The dignity and the honor of the Jamindar serfs, and every Jamindar will have absolute rule in his own Jamindari. Section 2 regarding merchants. It is plain that the infidel and treacherous British government have monopolized the trade of all the fine and valuable merchandise such as indigo, cloth and other articles of shipping, leaving only the trade of trifles to the people. Besides this, the profits of the traders are taxes, with postage, tolls and subscription for schools, etc. Notwithstanding all these concessions, the merchants are liable to imprisonment and disgrace at the instance or complaint of a worthless man. When the Badshahi government is established, all these aforesaid fraudulent practices shall be dispensed with, and the trade of every article, without exception, both by land and the water, will be open to the native merchants of Indium. It is therefore the duty of every merchant to take part in the war and aid the Bharatiya government with his men and money. Section 3 regarding public servants. It is not a secret thing that under the British government, native employed in the civil and military services have little respect, low pay, and no manner of influence, and all the posts of dignity and emolument in both the department and exclusively bestowed on Englishmen. Therefore, all the natives in the British service ought to be alive to their religion and interest, and abjuring their loyalty to the English side with the Bathshai government and obtain salaries of 200 and 300 rupees a month for the present, and be entitled to high posts in the future. Section 4 regarding artisans. It is evident that the European, by the introduction of English article to India, have thrown the weavers, the cotton dressers, the carpenters, the blacksmiths, and the shoemakers, etc., out of employ, and have engrossed their occupations so that every description of native artisans has been reduced to beggary. But under the Bathshai government, the native artisans will exclusively be employed in the service of the kings, the Raja, and the rich, and this will no doubt ensure their prosperity. Therefore, these artisans ought to renounce the English service. Section 5 regarding Pandits, Fakirs, and other learned persons. The Pandits and Fakirs being the guardians of the Hindu and Mohammedan religions respectively, and the Europeans being the enemies of both religions, and as at present a war is raging against in English on account of religion. The Pandits and Fakirs are bound to present themselves to me and take their shares in the holy war. What are the issues against British rule highlighted in the proclamation? Read the section on its social group carefully. Notice the language in which the proclamation is formulated and the variety of sentiment it appeals to. Comment this. What the shippers thought. This is one of RG's petitions or applications of rebel shippers that have survived. A century ago, the British arrived in Hindustan and gradually entertained troops in their service and became masters of every state. Our forefathers have always served them, and we also entered their service. By the mercy of God and with our assistance, the British also conquered every place they liked, in which thousands of us Hindustani men were sacrificed. But we never made any excuses or pretenses nor revolted. But in the year 1857, the British issued an order that new cartridges and muskets which had arrived from England were to be issued, in the former of which the fats of cows and pigs were mixed, and also the atta of wheat mixed with powdered bones was to be eaten, and even distributed them in every regiment of infantry, cavalry, and artillery. They gave these cartridges to the sowars, means mounted soldiers, on the 3rd Light Cavalry, and ordered them to bite them. The troopers objected to it and said that they would never bite them, for if they did, their religion and faith would be destroyed. Upon this, the British officer paraded the men of the 3 regiments, having prepared 1,400 English soldiers and other battalions of European troops and horse artillery surrounded them, and placing 6 guns before each of the infantry regiment, loaded the guns with graves and made 84 new troopers prisoners and put them in jail with irons on them. The reason that the soldiers of the cantonment were put into jail was that we should be frightened into biting the new cartridge. On this account, we and all our countrymen, having united together, have fought the British for the preservation of our faith. We have been compelled to make war for 2 years, and the Raja and chiefs who are with us in faith and religion are still so, and have undergone all sorts of trouble. We have fought for 2 years in order that our faith and religion may not be polluted. If the religion of a Hindu or Mussulman is lost, what remains in the world? Compare the reasons for the mutiny as stated in RAJ with those mentioned by the Talukdar. Source 3. Comment this. Against the symbols of oppressions, the proclamations completely rejected everything associated with British rule or Ferengi Raj. As they called it, they condemned the British for the annexations they had carried out and the treaties they had broken the British. The rebel leader said could not be trusted. What enraged the people was how British land revenue settlements had dispossessed landholders, both big and small, and foreign commerce had driven artisans and weavers to ruin. Every aspect of British rule was attacked, and the Ferengi accused of destroying a way of life that was familiar and cherished. Rebels wanted to restore the world. The proclamations expressed the widespread fear that the British were bent on destroying the caste and religions of Hindus and Muslims and converting them to Christianity, a fear that led people to believe many of the rumors that circulated at the time. People were urged to come together and fight to save their livelihood, their faith, their honor, their identity, a fight which was for the greater public good. As noted earlier, in many places, the rebellion against the British widened into an attack on all those who were seen as allies of the British or local oppressors. Often the rebels deliberately sought to humiliate the heirs of the city. In the village, they burned account books and ransacked moneylenders' houses. This reflected an attempt to overturn traditional hierarchies, rebel against all oppressors. It presented a glimpse of an alternative vision, perhaps of a more egalitarian society. Such visions were not articulated in the proclamations which sought to unify all social groups in the fight against Firangi Raj. The search for alternative power. Once British rule had collapsed, the rebels in places like Delhi, Lucknow, and Kanpur tried to establish some kind of structure of authority and administration. This was, of course, short-lived, but the attempts show that the rebel leaderships wanted to restore the pre-British world of the 18th century. The leaders went back to the culture of the court. Appointments were made to various posts. Arrangements made for the collection of land revenue and the payment of troops, orders issued to stop loot and plunder. Side by side, plans were made to fight battle against the British. Chains of command were laid down in the army. In all this, the rebels harked back to the 18th century Mughal world, a world that became a symbol of all that had been lost. The administrative structure established by the rebels was primarily aimed at meeting the demand of war. However, in most cases, these structures could not survive the British onslaughts. But in Awadh, where resistance to the British lasted longest, plans of counter-attack were being drawn up by the Lucknow Court and hierarchies of command were in place as late as the last month of 1857 and the early part of 1858. Discuss. What do you think are the major problems faced by historians in reconstructing the point of view of the rebels? Comment this. Villagers as rebels. An officer reporting from rural hours spelled as Oudh in the following account noted the Oudh people are gradually pressing down on the line of communication from the north. The Oudh people are villagers. These villagers are nearly intangible to Europeans, melting away before them and collecting them again. The civil authorities report these villagers to amount to very large numbers of men with a number of guns. What, according to this account, were the problems faced by the British in dealing with these villagers? Comment this. For repressions. It is clear from all accounts that we have of 1857 that the British did not have an easy time in putting down to the rebellion. Before sending out troops to reconquer North India, the British passed a series of laws to help them quell the insurgency by a number of acts passed in May and June 1857. Not only was the whole of North India put under martial law, but military officers and even ordinary Britons were given the power to try and punish Indians suspected of rebellion. In other words, the ordinary processes of law and trial were suspended, and it was put out the rebellion would have only one punishment: death. Armed with these newly enacted special laws that the enforcement brought in from Britain, the Britain began the task of suppressing the revolt. They, like the rebels, recognized the symbolic value of Delhi. The British thus mounted a two-pronged attack. One force moved from Calcutta into North India, and the other from the Punjab, which was largely peaceful, to reconquer Delhi. British Map 2. The map shows the important centers of revolt and the lines of British attack against the rebels. Peshawar, Lahore, Jalandhar, Ambala, Saharanpur, Meerut, Delhi, Aligarh, Mathura, Agra, Ajmer, Karachi, Gujarat, Ahmedabad, Mhow, Surat, Aurangabad, Bombay, Jabalpur, Allahabad, Jhansi, Gwalior, Chittagong, Damdam, Calcutta, Banaras, Azamgarh, Kanpur, Lucknow. Principal centers of revolt, British thrust. Attempts to recover Delhi began in earnest in early June 1857, but it was only in late September that the city was finally captured. The fighting and losses on both sides were heavy. One reason for this was the fact that rebels from all over North India had come to Delhi to defend the capital. A mosque on the Delhi Ridge, photographed by Felix Beto, 1857 to 58. After 1857, British photographers recorded innumerable images of dissolutions and riot. In the Gangetic Plan, the progress of British reconquest was slow. The forces had to reconquer the area village by village. The countryside and the people around were entirely hostile. As soon as they began their counter-insurgency operations, the British realized that they were not dealing with a mere mutiny but an uprising that had huge popular support. In Awadh, for example, a British official called for Sheth estimated that three-fourths of the adult male population was in rebellion. The area was brought under control only in March 1858 after protracted fighting. The British used military power on a gigantic scale, but this was not the only instrument they used. In large parts of present-day Uttar Pradesh, where big landholders and peasants had offered a united resistance, the British tried to break up the unity by promising to give back to the big landholders their estates. Rebel landholders were dispossessed and the loyal rewarded. Many landholders died fighting the British or they escaped into Nepal where they died of illness or starvation. Secunderabad, Lucknow, photographed by Felix Beto, 1858, where we see four solitary figures within a desolate place that was once the pleasure garden built by Nawab Wajid Ali Shah. British forces led by Campbell killed over 2,000 rebel Sipahi who held the place in 1857. The skeletons strewn on the ground are meant to be cold warning of the futility of rebellion. Five images of the revolt. How do you know about the revolt, about the activities of the rebels and the measures of repression that we have been discussing? As we have seen, we have very few records on the rebels' point of view. There are a few rebel proclamations and notifications, as also some letters that rebel leaders wrote, but historians still now have continued to discuss rebel actions, primarily through accounts written by the British official. Accounts, of course, abound. Colonial administrations and military men left their versions in letters and diaries, autobiographies, and official histories. We can also gauge the official mindset and the changing British attitude through the innumerable memos and notes, assessment of situation, and reports that were produced. Many of these have now been collected in a set of volumes on mutiny records. These tell us about the fears and anxieties of officials and their perceptions of the rebels, the stories of the revolt that were published in British newspapers and magazines, narrated in gory detail the violence of the mutineers, and these stories inflamed public feelings and provoked demands of retributions and revenge. One important record of the mutiny is the pictorial images produced by the British and Indians. Paintings, pencil drawings, etchings, posters, cartoons, budget prints. Let us look at some of them and see what they tell us. Celebrating the saviors. British pictures offer a variety of images that were meant to provoke a range of different emotions and reactions. Some of them commo- commemorate the British heroes who saved the English and repressed the rebels. Relief of Lucknow. Painted by Thomas Jones Barker in 1859 is an example of this type. When the rebel forces besieged Lucknow, Henry Lawrence, the commissioner of Lucknow, collected the Christian population and took refuge in the heavily fortified residency. Lawrence was killed, but the residency continued to be defended under the command of Colonel English. On 25 September, James Outram and Henry Havelock arrived. Cut through the rebel forces and reinforced the British garrisons. 20 days later, Colin Campbell, who was appointed as the new commander of British forces in India, came with his forces and rescued the besieged British garrison. In British accounts, the siege of Lucknow became a story of survival, historic resistance, and the ultimate triumph of British power. Relief of Lucknow, painted by Thomas Jones Barker, 1859. Barker's painting celebrates the moment of Campbell's entry. At the center of the canvas are the British heroes Campbell, Outram, and Havelock. The gesture of the hands of those around led the spectators' eyes toward the center. The heroes stand on the ground that is well lit, with shadows in the foreground and the damaged residency in the background. The dead and injured in the foreground, a testimony to the suffering during the siege, while the triumphant figure of horses in the middle ground emphasized the fact that British power and the control had been re-established. To the British public, such paintings were reassuring. They created a sense that the time of trouble was past and the rebellion was over. The British were the victors. English Oman and the honor of Britain. Newspaper reports have a power over public imagination. They shape feelings and attitudes to events, inflamed particularly by tales of violence. Against women and children, there were public demands in Britain for revenge and retributions. The British government was asked to protect the honor of innocent women and ensure the safety of helpless children. Artists express as well as accept these sentiments through their visual representations of trauma and suffering. In Memoriam was painted by Joseph Noel Patton. 2 years after the mutiny, you can see English women and children huddled in a circle, looking helpless and innocent, seemingly waiting for the inevitable. Dishonored violence and death in Memoriam does not show gory violence, it only suggests it. It stirs up the spectator's imaginations and seeks to provoke anger and fury. It represents the rebels as violent and brutish, even though they remain invisible in the picture. In the background, you can see the British rescue forces arriving as saviors. In Memoriam by Joseph Noel Patton, 1859. Miss Wheeler defending herself against Sepoy in Kanpur. In another set of sketches and painting, we see women in a different light. They appear heroic, defending themselves against the attack of rebel. Miss Wheeler in figure stands firmly at the center, defending her honor, single-handedly killing the attacking rebels. As in all such British representations, the rebels are demonized. Here, four burly males with sword and gun are showed attacking a woman. The woman struggles to save her honor and her life. In fact, it is represented as having a deeper religious connotations. It is a battle to save the honor of Christianity. The book lying on the floor is the Bible. Vengeance and retributions. As waves of anger and shock spread in Britain, demands for retribution grew louder. Visual representation and news about the revolt created a milieu in which violent repression and vengeance were seen as both necessary and just. It was as if justice demanded that the challenge to British honor and power to be met ruthlessly. Threatened by the rebellion, the British felt that they had to demonstrate their invincibility. In one such image, we see an allegorical female figure of justice with a sword in one hand and a shield in the other. Her posture is aggressive, her face expresses rage and the desire for revenge. She is trampling sheep under her feet while a mass of Indian women with children cover with fear. Justice Punch, 12 September 1857. The caption at the bottom reads, "The news of the terrible massacre at Kanpur produced an outburst of fiery indignations and wild desire for revenge throughout the whole of England." Justice. There were innumerable other pictures and cartoons in the British press that sanctioned brutal repression and violent reprisals. The captions at the bottom reads, "The British Lions vengeance on the Bengal tiger." Punch, 1857. What idea in the picture projecting? What is being expressed through the images of the lion and the tiger? What do the figures of the woman and the child depicts? Comment this. The British Lions vengeance on the Bengal tiger. The performance of terror. The urge for vengeance and retribution was expressed in the brutal way in which the rebels were executed. They were blown from guns or hanged from the gallows. Images of these executions were widely circulated through popular journals. Executions of mutineers in Peshawar blowing from the guns. Illustrated London News, 3rd October 1857. The scene of execution here appears to be a stage where drama is being performed, an enchantment of brutal power. Mounted soldier and sepoy in uniform dominate the scene. They have to watch the execution of their fellow sepoy and experience the chilling consequences of rebellion. Executions of mutinies, shepherds and Peshawar. Illustrated London News, 3rd October 1857. In the scene of execution, 12 rebels hanging in a row with cannons all around them. What you see is not routine punishment, it is the performance of terror for it to instill fear among people. Punishment could not be discreetly meted out in closed spaces. It had to be theatrically performed in the open. No time for clemency. At a time when the clamor was for vengeance, pleas for moderation were ridiculed, when Governor General Canning declared that a gesture of leniency and a show of mercy would help in winning back the loyalty of the Sepoy, he was mocked in the British press. In one of the cartoons published in the pages of Punch, a British journal of comics satire, Canning is shown as a looming figure, father figure with his protective hand over the head of a Sepoy who still holds an unsheathed sword in one hand and a dagger in the other, both dripping with blood. Figure, an imaginary that recurs in a number of British pictures of the time. The Clemency of Canning, Punch, 24 October 1857. The caption at the bottom of the cartoon reads, Governor General, well, then they shan't blow him from nasty guns, but he must promise to be a good little Sepoy. The Clemency of Canning's. Nationalist images. Films and posters have helped create the image of Rani Lakshmibai as a masculine warrior. The national movement in the 20th century drew its inspiration from the events of 1857. A whole world of nationalist imaginations was woven around the revolt. It was celebrated as the first war of independence in which all sections of the people of India came together to fight against imperial rule. Art and literature, as much as the writing of history, have helped in keeping alive the memory of 1857. The leaders of the revolt were presented as a heroic figures leading the country into battle, rousing the people to righteous indignations against oppressive imperial rule. Heroic poems are written about the valor of Queen who, with a sword in one hand and the reins of her horse in the other, fought for the freedom of her motherland. Rani of Jhansi was represented as a masculine figure chasing the enemies, slaying British soldiers and valiantly fighting till her lost. Children in many parts of India grow up reading the lines of Subhadra Kumari Chauhan. खूब लड़ी मर्दानी वो तो झांसी वाली रानी थी. Like a man she fought, she was the Rani of Jhansi. In popular prints, Rani Lakshmibai is usually portrayed in battle armor with a sword in hand and riding a horse, a symbol of the determination of resist injustice and alien rule. The images indicate how the painters who produced them perceived those events, what they felt and what they sought to convey through the painting and cartoons. We know about the public that looked at the paintings, appreciated or criticized the image, and brought copies or reproduction to put up their home. These images did not only reflect the emotions and feelings of the times in which they were produced, they also shaped sensibilities fed by the images that circulated in Britain. The public sanctioned the most brutal forms of repressions of the rebels. On the other hand, nationalist imageries of the revolt helped shape the nationalist imaginations. Examine the element in each of the visual in this section and discuss how they allow you to identify the perspective of the artist. Comment this. Timeline. 1801 Subsidiary Alliance introduced by Wellesley in Awadh. 1856 Nawab Wajid Ali Shah deposed, Awadh annexed. 1856 to 57, Somali Revenue Settlement introduced in Awadh by British. 1857, 10th May, Mutiny starts in Meerut. 11 to 12 May, Delhi garrisons revolt. Bahadur Shah accepts nominal leadership. 20 to 27 May, Sipai Mutiny is Aligarh, Etawah, Manipuri, Eta. 30 May, rising in Lucknow. May-June, mutiny turns into a general revolt of the people. 30 June, British Sapar defeat in the Battle of Chinnath. 25 September, British force under Havelock and Outram enter the residency in Lucknow. July, Shahumal killed in battle. 1858 June, Rani Jhansi killed in battle. Answer in 100 to 150 words. Comment this. Figure. Faces of rebels. Write a short essay to 50 to 300 words in the following. Comment this. Map work. On an outline map of India, mark Calcutta means Kolkata, Bombay means Mumbai, and Madras means Chennai, three major centers of British power in 1857. Refer to maps 1 and 2 and plot the areas where the revolt was most widespread. How close or far were these areas from the colonial cities? Comment this. Projects. Choose one. 11. Read a biography of any one of the leaders of the revolt of 1857. Check the sources used by the biographers. Do these include government reports, newspaper accounts, stories in regional language, visual materials, anything else? Do all the sources say the same thing, or are there differences? Prepare a report on your findings. Comment this. 12. See a film made on the revolt of 1857 and write about the way it presents the revolt. How does it depict the British, the rebels, and those who remained loyal to the British? What does it say about peasant, city-dwellers, tribals, jamindars, and talukdars? What kinds of a response does the film seek to evoke? Comment this.